The road into Bethany is dusty and narrow, and on this particular afternoon it is crowded with mourners. They have come from Jerusalem, which is less than 2 miles away. They have come because a man named Lazarus is dead, and because his 2 sisters, Martha and Mary, are the kind of women people show up for. The kind of women who have fed strangers and opened their home and sat with the grieving themselves so many times that now when grief comes for them, half the neighborhood comes with it. Lazarus has been dead for 4 days, and somewhere on this road, walking toward the mourners, is Jesus of Nazareth. He already knows what he is going to do. He already knows that within the hour he will stand at the mouth of a stone tomb and call a dead man back to life. He knows this the way he knows everything completely, before it happens, with perfect clarity. And yet, when Mary of Bethany reaches him, when she falls at his feet on that dusty road and weeps, something happens that no theology class fully prepares you for. The Son of God begins to cry, not politely, not one dignified tear running down a composed face. The Greek word the Gospel writer uses is the same word used for the wailing of women at a Jewish funeral: loud, public, uncontrolled. The God who spoke the universe into existence is standing on a road outside a small village, and he is weeping with a woman he loves over a death he is about to reverse. Stay with me, because this matters more than you might think. The shortest verse in the entire Bible is 2 words long. You have probably heard it. Every Sunday school child has memorized it because it is easy to memorize. Jesus wept, 2 words. John chapter 11, verse 35. Scholars have written entire books about those 2 words. Theologians have debated what they mean for 20 centuries. And most of them, I would argue, have not gone far enough, because this is not a story about a polite moment of divine feeling. This is not a story about Jesus having a hard day. This is not a story about a God who felt sorry for people from a safe distance, the way you might feel sorry for someone you see crying on the street before you walk past. This is a story about a God who walked directly into the worst moments of human life, who sat in the grief, who let it land on him, who, even knowing the resurrection was minutes away, did not skip the tears. There is a verse in the Psalms, Psalm 56, verse 8, that says, "God keeps a bottle for your tears, that he collects them," that every tear you have ever cried has been recorded, kept, not forgotten. We will come back to that bottle. But not yet. First, we need to go to a tomb outside Bethany. We need to watch what happens when the man who is the resurrection and the life stands in front of death and weeps anyway. Because what happens in that moment will tell you something about the nature of God that changes everything. To understand why Jesus wept at Bethany, you have to understand what 4 days meant. In first-century Jewish tradition, the soul of a dead person was believed to linger near the body for 3 days. 3 days of possibility. 3 days where mourners would sometimes return to the tomb just to check, just in case. There are accounts in rabbinic literature of people who appeared to be dead and then revived within that 3-day window. It happened rarely, but it happened enough that the 3-day period carried a kind of fragile hope. 4 days meant something different. 4 days meant the hope was gone. 4 days meant the soul had departed. 4 days meant the decomposition had begun. Martha will say it plainly. When Jesus asks them to roll away the stone, "Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he hath been dead 4 days." She is not being dramatic. She is being precise. 4 days in a sealed tomb in the Palestinian heat meant there was nothing left to hope for. Jesus knew this when he waited. Read John chapter 11 carefully, and you will find something that stops most people cold. When Jesus received the message that Lazarus was sick, when the sisters sent word saying, "Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick," Jesus did not immediately leave. The Gospel says he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. He waited, deliberately, until he knew that Lazarus was not just sick, not just dying, but dead. And not just dead past the point where anyone could accuse him of simply waking a man from a coma He arrived at maximum grief on purpose. So when Martha hears that Jesus is finally coming, she runs out to meet him on the road. And what she says to him when she reaches him is one of the most complicated sentences in the New Testament. "Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died." Read that sentence again. Hear it the way it was spoken by a woman who has spent 4 days in a house full of mourners, who has organized the food and received the visitors and kept everything functioning the way Martha always does, while inside she has been carrying this one unanswerable question. Where were you? You knew. You could have come. You healed strangers. You healed people you had never met, people who grabbed the hem of your robe in a crowd, and you did not come for us. It is not quite an accusation, but it is not quite not one either. Jesus does not defend himself. He does not explain the 2-day delay. He does not say, "Martha, I had a plan, trust me." He says, "Thy brother shall rise again." And Martha, precise, theological, composed Martha, gives him the correct doctrinal answer. "I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day." She believes in the resurrection. She has the theology exactly right, but her theology is keeping the grief at arm's length. She is talking about the last day. Jesus is standing in front of her right now, so he says something that cuts right through the doctrine. "I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live." Not "I will bring about the resurrection," not "I have power over resurrection." I am the resurrection. Present tense, standing on a dirt road outside your village, looking you in the eye. Martha hears this and goes back to get Mary. And here is where something shifts. Mary does not run to Jesus the way Martha did. Mary walks slowly, and when she reaches him, she does not open with theology. She does not manage her grief into a sentence. She falls at his feet, and she weeps. The same words as her sister, "Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died," but from her lips they sound completely different. From Mary, they are not a theological puzzle. They are a broken heart speaking out loud. Now watch what happens next. Because this is the moment everything turns. The Gospel says that when Jesus saw Mary weeping, and when he saw the crowd of mourners weeping around her, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. The Greek word here is embryomai. It is a violent word. It describes the sound a horse makes when it is agitated. It means to snort, to be seized with indignation, to be moved with a force that rises up from somewhere deep and involuntary. Most translations soften this word into deeply moved, but scholars like D.A. Carson and Leon Morris have argued that embryomai carries something closer to fury, that Jesus standing at the edge of that crowd of mourners was not just sad, he was angry, not at Mary, not at the mourners, at death itself, at what death does to people, at the way it unmakes families and leaves sisters weeping in the road and fills houses with the smell of absence. Here is what most people miss about this moment. Jesus was not weeping because he had lost control of his emotions. He was not weeping because he forgot that he was about to raise Lazarus. He wept with full knowledge of what was coming, and he wept anyway, because the grief in front of him was real, because Mary's tears were real, because the 4 days of absence were real, and they deserved to be grieved even if the ending was about to change. He asked where they had laid him. They said, "Lord, come and see." And then John chapter 11, verse 35, 2 words, placed here by a gospel writer who understood exactly what they meant. Jesus wept. The Greek word this time is different from the word used for Mary's weeping. Mary wept with Cleo, the loud, public, wailing grief of Jewish mourning. Jesus wept with Dacrio, quiet tears. Intimate. The kind of weeping you do when the grief is personal and the loss is real, and you are not performing sorrow for anyone, you are simply in it. The crowd watching saw this and said, "Behold how he loved him." Not "behold how powerful he is," Not behold how wise, not behold the miracle that is coming. They saw the tears, and they said, "See how much he loved him." Because love was the only explanation for tears when you already knew the ending. And then he raised Lazarus from the dead. But here is the thing you need to hold on to as we move forward. Jesus did not skip the grief to get to the miracle. He did not say, "Dry your tears, the resurrection is coming." He sat in the grief first. He let it be what it was. He wept with the people who were weeping, which, as the Apostle Paul would later write to the Romans, is exactly what love does. The tomb of Lazarus is the first time we see Jesus weep. It will not be the last. And the second time you might not expect where it happens. Before we go to Jerusalem, let me stop for just a moment. Because if you have made it this far into this video, you are not here by accident. You are someone who takes the life of Jesus seriously, who wants to understand him, not just know facts about him. And I want to ask you to do one thing right now. Hit subscribe if you have not already. This channel exists to go deep into the parts of Scripture that most people rush past. If that is something you want more of, subscribe and hit the bell so you do not miss the next one. And now, Jerusalem. Here is what you need to picture. It is the first day of the week that will end with the crucifixion. The week we now call Holy Week. Jesus is riding a young donkey down the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives, descending toward the city of Jerusalem, and the crowd around him is enormous. They have heard about Lazarus. Word has spread from Bethany through the surrounding villages and into the capital. People have come out of the city to meet him, carrying palm branches, throwing their cloaks on the road in front of the donkey. They are shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest!" It is the loudest, most public moment of Jesus' entire ministry. It is the moment the crowd has been building toward for 3 years. The miracles, the teachings, the feeding of thousands, it has all been leading here. The people believe something is finally happening, that this is the moment the long-promised king takes his throne. And this is where it gets remarkable, because as Jesus crests the ridge of the Mount of Olives and the city of Jerusalem comes into full view below him, the white limestone of the Temple Mount catching the morning sun, the crowded streets, the smoke of the sacrifices rising, he stops, and he weeps. Not the quiet dacrio of Bethany. Luke chapter 19, verse 41, uses the word kleio, the loud, public, audible grief, the same word used for wailing at funerals. Jesus is sitting on a donkey at the top of a hill, surrounded by a crowd that is cheering his name, and he is weeping loudly over the city spread out below him. Can you imagine what that looked like to the people nearest him? They are shouting Hosanna, and the man they are shouting about is crying. Not moved to tears crying, not a single dignified tear, weeping, in public, on what should have been his greatest day. He speaks to the city directly, and what he says is one of the most heartbreaking speeches in all of Scripture. "If thou hadst known, even thou, at least in this thy day, the things which belong unto thy peace, but now they are hid from thine eyes. For the days shall come upon thee, that thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee round, and keep thee in on every side, and shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee, and they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another." He is not speaking in metaphor. He is describing a military siege with the precision of someone who has seen it. An encircling army, a trench, a blockade, total destruction. Not one stone left on another. Pay attention to this. 40 years after Jesus spoke those words, in the year AD 70, the Roman general Titus surrounded Jerusalem with 4 legions. The historian Josephus, a Jewish eyewitness who was present for the siege and survived it, records what happened in extraordinary detail in his work, The Jewish War. Titus built a wall around the entire city to prevent escape. The people inside starved. Families turned on each other for scraps of food. Josephus describes a mother who killed and ate her own infant son. When the Romans finally broke through, they burned the temple. The gold in the roof melted and ran down between the stones, and the soldiers pried every stone apart to get to it. Not one stone was left on another. Josephus estimates that 1,100,000 people died in the siege and its aftermath. 97,000 were taken captive. Jesus wept over this. On the day the crowd was cheering for him, he could see it coming with perfect clarity: the fire, the starvation, the children, the temple reduced to rubble, and he wept over a city that did not yet know what was coming. And here is the thing that should stop you cold. He did not weep with detachment. He did not weep the way you might weep watching a tragedy in a film sad, but safely separated from it. He wept with the grief of someone who loved the city, who had walked its streets, who had taught in its temple courts, who had healed its sick and fed its hungry and wept at the funerals of its people. Jerusalem was not an abstraction to Jesus. It was home. Later in the same week, Matthew records him saying, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets, and stonest them which are sent unto thee. How often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not." That image, a hen gathering her chicks under her wings, it sounds gentle, almost pastoral. But there is a dimension to it that most people miss entirely. When a barn catches fire, a mother hen does not run away. She runs toward the fire. She spreads her wings and gathers her chicks underneath her, and she holds them there, and she burns. The farmer finds her the next morning dead, wings still spread, and when he lifts her body, the chicks run out from underneath her, alive. That is the image Jesus chose. Not a distant God watching from a safe height. A God who runs toward the fire. A God who spreads his arms wide and burns. The crowd on Palm Sunday heard Hosanna and thought he was coming to save them from Rome. He was weeping because he was coming to save them from something far worse. And the city did not know the difference. But he wept over it anyway. Not in anger, not in frustration, in grief. The same grief a parent feels when a child walks toward a cliff and will not listen to the warning. The historian Eusebius, writing in the 4th century in his church history, notes that when the Roman siege began in AD 70, the Christians in Jerusalem fled the city across the Jordan to a town called Pella. They had remembered the warning. They had taken the tears of Jesus seriously, and they survived. 2 groups of people heard the same words. One group wept with him, remembered, and fled. The other stayed and was destroyed. The tears of Jesus over Jerusalem were not sentiment. They were a siren, and the people who heard them as a siren lived. There is one more place Jesus wept, and it is the one that will cost you something to sit with. Because the 3rd time Jesus wept, there was no crowd, no mourners, no cheering. There was only darkness and an olive grove and the weight of everything that was coming. The garden is called Gethsemane. Most people picture it as a peaceful place. Ancient olive trees, silver-green leaves catching moonlight, the kind of place you would go to pray on a quiet evening. And in some ways, it was. Jesus had been there before. The Gospel of John tells us that Judas knew where to find him because Jesus often went there with his disciples. It was a familiar place, a place of retreat. But the name tells you something the peaceful image does not. Gethsemane comes from the Aramaic gat shemanim. Gat means press. Shemanim means oils. It means oil press. The garden was named for the large stone presses used to crush olives, to apply such enormous weight to the fruit that it released everything inside it, drop by drop. Under pressure, no olive could resist. You need to hold that image for what comes next. It is Thursday night. The Passover meal is finished. Jesus has washed his disciples' feet, broken bread with them, told them things they did not yet understand. Now he leads them across the Kidron Valley and into the garden. He takes Peter and James and John, his 3 closest friends, the ones who were with him at the Transfiguration, the ones he trusted most, and he asks them to do one thing: stay awake, watch with me. Then he goes a little further into the garden, alone, and the Gospel of Luke records that he fell on his face and prayed. The Gospel of Mark says he began to be sore amazed and very heavy, the Greek word ekthambio, which means to be struck with terror, not apprehension, not nervousness, terror. The word used when a person encounters something so overwhelming that the body responds before the mind can catch up. The writer of Hebrews, looking back at this moment, says, "Who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and was heard in that he feared." Strong crying and tears. The writer of Hebrews wants you to know that what happened in Gethsemane was not a composed, dignified prayer. It was desperate. It was loud. It was wet with tears. And Luke adds one more detail that no physician reading this passage can ignore. "And being in an agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was, as it were, great drops of blood falling down to the ground." Medical literature describes a condition called hematidrosis. It occurs under conditions of extreme psychological stress, terror so profound that the capillaries feeding the sweat glands rupture and blood seeps through the skin mixed with sweat. It is rare, it is real, it is documented in medical journals, and it means that before a single nail was driven, before a single whip fell, Jesus was already bleeding in that garden. From the inside out, under the weight of what was coming, here is the part nobody tells you. He prayed 3 times that the cup would pass from him. "O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me." 3 times. 3 times he asked. 3 times the answer was the same. Not yet. Not this way. This is the way. And between each prayer, he walked back to where Peter and James and John were waiting. They were asleep. All 3 of them. Every time. So Jesus wept in Gethsemane, entirely alone. No one keeping watch. No one sitting with him in the darkness the way he had sat with Mary and hers. The disciples who had watched him raise Lazarus from the dead, who had seen him walk on water, who had heard him say, "I am the resurrection and the life," they were asleep on the ground while he bled and wept and prayed alone in an olive press. He was not weeping because he was weak. Read that sentence again. He was not weeping because he was weak. He was weeping because he was fully, completely, terrifyingly human, and because he understood with divine clarity exactly what the cross would mean. Every sin, every shame, every act of cruelty and betrayal and violence that human beings had committed since the beginning of time and would commit until the end of all of it, was about to land on him at once, not metaphorically. Actually, the full, accumulated, crushing weight of human evil pressed onto one human body in one afternoon on a hill outside Jerusalem. The garden was named for a press, and he went into it knowing he was the olive. He went anyway. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. 6 words, spoken through tears, in the dark, alone. And those 6 words are the reason you are still here. The reason there is such a thing as forgiveness. The reason the tomb did not stay sealed. The reason, and we are almost there, that a bottle exists for your tears too. The disciples woke up when Judas arrived with soldiers carrying torches. The arrest happened quickly. By morning, Jesus was before Pontius Pilate. By noon, he was on the cross. By 3 in the afternoon, it was finished. But before we close, before we get to the empty tomb and the folded grave clothes and the morning that changed everything, I need to take you somewhere else entirely. I need to take you to a garden in Milan, not in the 1st century. In the 4th, the year is AD 386. A man named Augustine is 31 years old, and he is sitting under a fig tree in a garden in northern Italy, and he is weeping. Not because someone he loves has died, not because a city is burning. He is weeping because he cannot stop sinning. Because he has known for years what he ought to do. He has read the philosophers, he has heard the bishops, he has sat with his mother Monica, who has prayed for him for decades, and he still cannot make himself change. He is brilliant and broken, and he knows it, and the knowing makes it worse. He writes about this moment in his Confessions, one of the most widely read books in the history of the world. He describes weeping bitterly under that fig tree, unable to move, until he hears a child's voice from a neighboring house chanting over and over, Tole leg, take up and read, take up and read. He opened Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 13. And something broke open in him that had been sealed shut for 31 years. In an instant, he writes, all the darkness of doubt vanished away, not gradually, not after more effort. Gone. The man who would become the greatest theologian in the history of the Western Church, whose writings on grace and sin and the love of God would shape 15 centuries of Christian thought, was saved by grief. His tears were the door. And here is what I want you to see. The tears of Augustine in that Milan garden and the tears of Jesus in Gethsemane are part of the same story. A God who entered human grief so completely, so physically, so personally, that when a broken man weeps under a fig tree 16 centuries later, he is not weeping alone. He is weeping in the company of a God who already knows exactly what that darkness feels like. The oil press works both ways. It pressed Jesus so that something could flow out of him and into you. And when life presses you, when the grief is real and the night is long and the people who should be watching with you have fallen asleep, you are not in unknown territory. You are in Gethsemane. And you are not alone there. We need to go back to the bottle. At the very beginning of this video, I mentioned a verse in the Psalms, Psalm 56, verse 8. David writes it while he is hiding from his enemies, while people are hunting him, while everything in his life is coming apart. And in the middle of all of that, he says this to God, Thou tellest my wanderings. Put thou my tears in thy bottle. Are they not in thy book? God keeps a bottle for your tears. He counts them. He collects them. He records them in a book. Not one tear you have ever cried has fallen without being caught. Not one night you have spent weeping has gone unwitnessed. Not one moment of grief has been invisible to the God who made you. But here is what I did not tell you at the beginning. Here is what changes everything. The same God who keeps a bottle for your tears once knelt in a garden and shed his own. The same hands that David imagined collecting human tears were themselves shaking in Gethsemane. The same eyes that see every tear you cry were red from weeping outside a tomb in Bethany. The same voice that spoke the universe into existence broke with grief over a city that would not listen. The bottle goes both ways. This is not a God who watches human suffering from a comfortable distance and takes notes. This is a God who climbed down into it, who let it be his own, who wept at tombs and over cities and alone in gardens so that you would never have to wonder whether he understands. He understands. Not theoretically, not from a distance. He understands from the inside. So here is what I want you to carry out of this video. The first thing is this. Jesus wept 3 times in Scripture at the tomb of Lazarus, over the city of Jerusalem, and alone in the Garden of Gethsemane. Every single time, he wept with complete knowledge of what was coming. His tears were never ignorance. They were never defeat. They were intimacy. They were the tears of someone who loved so deeply that the pain of the people he loved became his own pain, even when he already knew how the story ended. The second thing is this. Whatever you are grieving right now, whatever tomb you are standing in front of, whatever city you are watching burn, whatever garden you are alone in tonight, he has already been there. Not as a distant observer, not as someone who read about it. He has been there with his face on the ground and his sweat turning to blood, and no one keeping watch with him. He knows the weight of it. He knows the loneliness of it. He knows what it costs to say, nevertheless, not my will but thine, when everything in you is screaming for a different answer. And the third thing, the one I want you to carry furthest, Revelation chapter 21, verse 4. John is an old man in exile on a black volcanic island in the Aegean Sea called Patmos, and he records a vision of what is coming at the end of all things. He sees God making everything new, and he hears a voice from the throne saying, "And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away." The hands that trembled in Gethsemane will be the hands that dry your face. The eyes that wept over Lazarus and over Jerusalem and alone in the dark will be the eyes that look at you on that final day and say, "It is finished." All of it. Every grief, every loss, every night you spent in the dark with no one keeping watch finished. Gone. Passed away. The God who wept is the God who wins, and he wins for you. Before you go, one question. Which of these three moments hit closest to where you are right now? The tomb, the grief of losing someone you love? The city, the grief of watching something you care about fall apart and not being able to stop it? Or the garden, the grief of being completely alone in the dark, with everyone around you asleep? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this video meant something to you, share it with someone who is standing at a tomb right now. Someone who needs to know that the shortest verse in the Bible is also one of the most important things God ever said to the human race. Jesus wept. 2 words. And those 2 words contain more theology than most sermons ever will. Because they tell you this, the God of the universe is not untouched by your pain. He is not unmoved by your grief. He is not watching from a safe distance with dry eyes and a plan. He wept for Lazarus, for Jerusalem, in a garden alone. And if you are weeping tonight, he is not far from that either. He has never been far from that.